My name is Eleonora. My life smells of almond glue, old leather, and the faint dust of centuries. I am a restorer and bookbinder at the National Library of France. I am the person who, in silence, under the light of a green lamp, gives a second life to books damaged by time or human neglect. My fingers know how to strengthen a cracked spine, how to stitch together crumbling pages, how to find traces of nearly vanished gold embossing beneath layers of dirt and wax. My work is not a craft, it is a dialogue with the past. It has taught me patience and the cardinal law of restoration. You cannot create something new, you can only preserve what was, with infinite care. For 18 years, I applied this philosophy to my marriage to Matthew. I saw our union as a unique, priceless manuscript written in exquisite calligraphy on the finest parchment. Each of our anniversaries was a new chapter, each shared laugh a graceful vignette in the margins. I was its guardian. I believed it was my duty to protect our tome, smooth out the rough edges, polish every letter, so that our love letter would read easily and beautifully, without smudges or blots. I was so absorbed in preserving its perfect form that I didn't notice how the content itself had changed, how the ink on our pages began to fade, revealing a completely different, alien, and cruel text beneath. Our first 15 years were flawless. A time when it seemed as if every page of our lives were illuminated with pure gold. We met at a lecture on medieval scriptoria at the Sorbonne. I was a graduate student obsessed with the history of books. He was an established, brilliant expert on contemporary art who had come to expand his horizons. After the lecture, he approached me and said the phrase that marked the beginning of our romance: "You speak of dead books with such passion, as if they were alive. Tell me more about them." And I did. This conversation lasted well into the night, flowing from CAF to bistro, from bistro to the Seine embankment. Matthew was a man from another world. His universe consisted of outrageous installations, daring performances, and the cold geometry of auction rooms. He was a man of the future, I was a man of the past. But that night, we discovered our common ground, a passion for beauty embodied in form. He was irresistible. Not with that glossy, poster boy beauty, but with the mature, confident strength of a man who knew his own worth. He knew how to listen. He looked at me as if I were the rarest and most interesting piece in his collection. A year later, he proposed to me in Rodin's garden, next to the sculpture The Kiss. Image of Rodin's sculpture The Kiss, he said, "I want our life to be a work of art like that, eternal and full of passion." And it was. Our apartment in the Marais district, with its huge windows and 17th-century stucco, became our shared canvas. His avant-garde paintings hung on the walls next to my bookshelves filled with antique volumes. The air smelled of his expensive cologne, with its notes of sandalwood, and my paste. When our son, Sebastian, was born, Matthew brought home a huge telescope. Every evening, he placed it by the window and showed him the stars. "Look," he'd say, "this is our own galaxy. And you're its center." He was a wonderful father. He didn't just love Sebastian, he opened the world to him. They built futuristic cities out of Lego blocks, went to the Pompidou Center and debated the artist's message, and in the evenings, Matthew read the Odyssey aloud to him, imitating the voices of the Cyclops and Sirens. I was absolutely happy. My life was like a perfectly preserved book in a precious binding. I had a loving husband, an adored son, and an interesting job. I was certain that our story was written for the ages, that its ink would never fade, its pages would never decay. I was the world's best restorer, and I would never allow my greatest masterpiece to be destroyed. What arrogance! What blindness! The destruction began unnoticed. Like mold, which first appears as a tiny, barely visible spot on the inside of a bookbinding. Matthew opened a new gallery. It was his most ambitious project. He poured everything into it, money, time, soul. And along with the gallery, she entered his life. Solange. She was his new discovery. A young artist who worked in mixed media, photography, painting, collage. Her works were disturbing, dark, full of a kind of heartbreaking, painful beauty. Matthew was obsessed with her talent. "Eleanor, you have to see this," he said, showing me her portfolio. "She's the new Francesca Woodman, only bolder. She's not afraid of the dark. She dives into it." I saw talent, but I also saw that same destructive force that frightened me. Matthew became her patron, her mentor, her everything. He spent days and nights in her studio. "She's going through a difficult time," he explained to me. "Geniuses need support. You, with your love of harmony, will never understand that." It was the first time he used my essence against me. My love of harmony suddenly became a flaw. My quiet peace, a reproach to his ebullient nature. He became different. More abrupt, more intolerant. Our evenings, when we discussed books and paintings, gave way to his monologues about Solange. About her genius, her vulnerability, her difficult childhood. I knew everything about her, but I ceased to know anything about my own husband. One day, Sebastian, then 14, returned from school upset. "I was at my dad's gallery," he said. He promised to show me the new exhibits. Instead, I sat alone for an hour while he talked with this artist. They were laughing, and he was touching her hair. I felt so awkward. A cold hand squeezed my heart. I tried to chalk it all up to Matthew's paternal concern for his prot. But I already knew it was a lie. The mold stain on the binding of our marriage was beginning to grow. In restoration, there's a term, a palimpsest. It's a manuscript written on parchment from which the previous text has been scraped away. Sometimes, at a certain angle or under certain lighting, old, worn letters appear beneath the new ones. My life had become such a palimpsest. Beneath the visible text of our happy marriage, I began to discern another, secret and ugly scenario. Matthew became a virtuoso of lies. His life was filled with meetings with collectors that were actually dinners with her, trips to biennales that turned out to be romantic weekends. I found clues. A forgotten bill from a restaurant for two, where he supposedly attended a business meeting, or a postcard from a hotel in Honfleur, where he went alone to think. I didn't create a scene. I asked questions. Calmly, like a researcher examining a damaged manuscript. "Matthew, I thought you were having dinner with Monsieur Dubois. But the bill says 2 floating island desserts. Isn't he diabetic?" He grew cold and angry. "You're searching my pockets? How low have you sunk, Eleanor?" It was a meeting with his assistant. "Do you have to turn everything into a detective story?" He mastered the art of turning everything upside down, making me feel guilty. My suspicions became, in his interpretation, my hysteria, my pain, my self-doubt. It was a sophisticated form of psychological torture. He erased our text and accused me of seeing empty spaces. The worst thing was that he alienated Sebastian from me. He convinced him that I was stuck in the past, that I don't understand the modern world, that I was suffocating him, Matthew, with my correctness. He took his son to bohemian parties at Solange's studio, where teenagers drank wine alongside adults and discussed contemporary art. Sebastian returned from there a different man, prickly, mocking. "Mom, you're so boring," he snapped at me one day. Matthew wasn't just cheating on me. He was systematically destroying my world, knocking my main support system, my son, out from under me. The end came on the opening day of Solange's first major exhibition. Matthew had invested more than just money in this event, he had invested his entire being in it. It was to be the apotheosis, his declaration of intent. He insisted that Sebastian and I attend. "We must be there as a family," he said. "It's important for the gallery's image." I walked there as if to the scaffold. I wore a strict dark blue dress and pulled my hair back into a tight bun. It was my armor. The gallery was crowded. The air hummed with hundreds of voices and smelled of expensive perfume. I entered and stopped dead in my tracks. This wasn't just an exhibition. It was a diary of their romance. A series of photographs. Matthew asleep in rumpled sheets, bathed in morning light. Matthew laughing, a glass of wine in hand. Matthew, pensive, by the window of her studio. These were intimate moments stolen from me, transformed into art objects and put up for sale. In the center of the room hung the main work, a huge triptych. On the left panel was her, Solange. Naked, aggressive, looking defiantly at the viewer. Her body was covered in scratches and paint splatters. The painting was called Thirst. On the right panel was him, Matthew. Also naked, but in a relaxed, vulnerable pose. He didn't look at the viewer, his gaze was directed somewhere within himself. The painting was called Surrender. And in the center, on the largest canvas, was me. She painted me from behind, in my studio. I was sitting, hunched over a book. My figure was almost a silhouette, a dark spot against the brightly lit wall. The painting was called Afterward. I stood before this triptych and physically felt hundreds of eyes staring back and forth between the painting and me. I heard whispers behind me. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a public humiliation, an execution orchestrated by my husband. He hadn't simply left me for another woman. He had turned me into an afterword to their love story. I found Sebastian with my eyes. He stood there, pale as a sheet, looking at his father. And Matthew, beaming, embraced Solange and accepted congratulations. He didn't even look in our direction. I walked up to my son, took his hand, and, without a word, led him toward the exit. My precious manuscript hadn't simply been damaged. It had been torn from its binding, torn to pieces, and thrown at the crowd's feet. He returned well after midnight, drunk on success and champagne. I was waiting for him. It was a sensation. He declared from the doorway. The critics are raving. We sold the triptych before it even closed. I hope you got a good price for Afterward, I said quietly. His expression darkened. Eleanor, don't be petty. This is art. It transcends personal grievances. It's not an insult, Matthew. It's a betrayal. You took our lives, our family, our son, and turned it all into part of her PR campaign. Our lives? He laughed, a cold, cruel laugh. Our lives have long since turned into a library card index. Order, silence, and dust. With it, I live. I feel. But with you, I've turned into a museum exhibit, which you carefully brush away. His words were like acid eating away at parchment. He took everything I loved, everything I valued, silence, order, the past, and turned it into an accusation. I'm filing for divorce, I said, and my voice didn't fail me. It sounded as firm as the click of a guillotine. His expression changed from anger to surprise, and then to relief. Well, he said, perhaps it's for the best. He turned and walked into his office. No regret, no apology, simply a statement of fact. The final page of our shared story had been turned. The divorce was a war of attrition. Matthew, accustomed to winning, had no intention of giving in. He hired the most expensive lawyers who tried to prove I was worthless without him, that my work was just a nice hobby, and that everything we had was created solely by his genius. He fought for every inch of the apartment, every painting, every antique knick-knack. But I changed. Something inside me broke that evening in the gallery, but from that fracture, something new grew, hard as steel. I stopped being a guardian. I became a fighter. I found an elderly but very wise lawyer who specialized in family law. We fought. We collected documents, evidence, testimony. The hardest battle was for Sebastian. Matthew wanted joint custody, and I knew it was just a way to continue to influence and manipulate him. One evening, I sat down next to my son. Sebastian, I said, you're an adult now. The court will take your opinion into account. I want you to know that whatever you decide, I will accept it. But I want you to know the truth. And I told him everything. Without holding back, without hysteria. About the years of lies, about the humiliation, about how his father systematically destroyed our family. He listened silently, and I saw the childish resentment give way to adult understanding in his eyes. In court, he said he wanted to live with me. That was my greatest victory. The trial ended 2 years later. I won. I managed to defend the apartment and receive decent alimony. Matthew was furious. He left with Solange for London to start over, far from this toxic atmosphere. When it was all over, there was a deafening silence. I was left in our huge apartment, full of ghosts from the past. Sebastian, having entered university, moved into a dorm. I was alone. And this loneliness was almost unbearable. I sank into apathy. My work no longer brought me joy. I looked at damaged books and saw in them only a reflection of my own ruined life. I was on edge. One day, I received a call from a small monastery in Normandy. During a thunderstorm, their library had caught fire. Image of an ancient monastery library. The fire was extinguished, but the water used to douse the flames damaged dozens of unique 12th century manuscripts. They begged me to come and at least assess the damage. I went simply to escape myself. What I saw was horrific. Charred, water-swollen, moldy books. The smell of burning and dampness. But the abbot, an elderly monk named Brother Pierre, viewed this not with despair, but with hope. Their souls are still alive, he told me, carefully touching the blackened page. They just need to be freed. And so I stayed. I brought some of my tools to the monastery and began working. It was the most difficult restoration project of my life. I worked 16 hours a day. I straightened warped parchment sheets, cleaned soot from miniatures, stitched together what seemed like a pile of rubble. I lived in a tiny cell, ate simple monastic food, and worked. And in this silence, in this painstaking labor, I began to heal. Each salvaged manuscript was like a piece of my own soul, which I was bringing back to life. I worked there for almost a year. I returned to Paris a changed person. I sold our huge apartment in the Marais. I bought myself a small apartment and a spacious, bright studio on the La St. Louis. I founded my own restoration workshop. I no longer worked for a government agency. I chose which souls to save. 7 years have passed since our divorce. My workshop is one of the best in Europe. I have students. Sebastian, after graduating from university, became a curator at the Cluny Museum. He often comes to see me. We talk for hours. He became my best friend. I wasn't looking for a new relationship. I was happy alone. My life was full and meaningful. One day, a visitor entered my workshop. It was Matthew. He had grown older. Success hadn't brought him happiness. There was weariness in his eyes. He and Solange had broken up. Her fire had consumed him too. He brought me a book. A first edition of The Little Prince, which he had once given me. The book was badly damaged, someone had spilled wine on it, and several pages had been torn out. I thought, he said, not looking me in the eye, that if anyone could save it, it would be you. I took the book. His inscription was still legible on the flyleaf, for my Rose and our little prince. Now our planet is perfect. I'll try, I said. But it will never be the same. The scars will remain. I know, he replied. Some pages are better simply torn out and rewritten. He left. And I remained sitting with the book in my hands. He was wrong. Pages cannot be rewritten. They can only be strengthened so they don't fall apart completely, and sewn into a new, strong, honest binding. A binding that will not hide the scars but will make them part of history. A story of destruction and rebirth. My history. I opened my toolbox. My soul felt at peace. Work was waiting.